Hey everyone, thanks for joining with us again on another episode of What About Jesus with Gene and Grady. I'm Gene.
I'm Grady.
Last week we talked about Philemon and the importance of reconciliation. And so I thought today, Grady, we would look at a viewpoint from Onesimus, who was the slave that Paul sent back to reconcile with Philemon.
Yeah.
And so we're taking the viewpoint of hurting someone and the responsibility we have through this letter that we should take the first step in reconciling, especially if we're the ones who hurt someone.
Yeah.
So what is that? Well, let me ask it this way. Why is it so hard to reconcile?
I think it's just what we talked about last week, just the idea of forgiving is hard. And when pride comes into play and we start battling with that voice in our heads of, should I forgive them, or will they forgive me? Am I worthy to be forgiven, or did I do anything wrong? We can just have all these kind of battles inside of our minds, and so that first step of reconciliation can be really, really hard.
Okay, so for those of you that may not know who Onesimus is in this letter, he was Philemon's slave, and left Philemon and went to Rome. Somehow contacted Paul, and through that relationship became a Christian from Paul's example, I guess, in the words that are basically a Bible study of some sort. And now that he's a Christian, Paul is telling him, you're going to have to go back.
Yeah.
And so Onesimus is one of a few people that also is mentioned in the letter to Colossians. And so try to imagine yourself, okay, we have to imagine ourselves for this particular discussion. Mm-hmm. We're Onesimus. Paul gives us the letter that he wrote to Philemon, and we have to hand it to Philemon.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what's going through Onesimus's mind?
It's a big responsibility, especially, coming from a man that you would, look up to in that manner. Say, oh, wow, like you trust me with this, and this is a big task. Obviously coming from the disciple Paul. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Understand, too, that scholars say that when Onesimus left, who is a slave, traveling in a Roman society, is at risk of being killed because of being a runaway slave, but also he had to have some type of funding or financing to make that travel.
Yeah.
So scholars believe Onesimus probably stole something from Philemon to get some, and traded in to get money to make that travel to Rome. That definitely would be hard to reconcile, saying, I'm sorry I stole this.
Yeah.
Think about it. It could have been a family keepsake.
Yeah.
And here's Philemon, and Onesimus is going to try to make it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right. So, looking at Philemon and understanding, well, even just a relationship between two people is hard.
Yeah.
Think about our own marriages, okay? I'm sure neither one of us has ever done anything to hurt our wife.
Oh, yeah, naturally.
Yeah. I mean, we are the easiest people to get along with.
That's what they tell me.
Yep, yeah.
Maybe not.
Oh, I know that's not true on my part. I know I have done some of the dumbest things in my wife's and I relationship, to where I had to go back and say I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm right there with you.
And that's the old phrase I grew up with: eating crows, when you have to go back and say I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I found out crow pie tastes the same whether warm or cold.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when it's never our intention to hurt the ones we love, but when it happens, trying to, again, reconcile that relationship is something that's really hard to do. Me and Hannah, we've almost been married for almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
We've been together for almost 4 years. 5
Okay.
years. But those conversations never get easier. But for the betterment of a relationship and our marriage and the love that I have for her, when it comes time to apologize and reconcile and try, and you can't ever take anything back.
Right.
But change, what I say moving forward towards her, and hopefully she'll forgive me for being not smart.
Yeah. Thankful after 38 years of marriage with Debbie and I that she did forgive me through the years. But when it comes to seeking reconciliation, I think the biggest thing that it requires from us who did the hurting, we have to have a sense of humility.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
And what other thing should we have besides humility can you think of?
When we're going to ask for
we're the ones who did the hurting, so
right.
we're going to have to go back and make it right.
Have humility and also have honesty with yourself and with your spouse or with your significant other. Acknowledge that we did something wrong.
Right.
Because a lot of times we're saying sorry because we hurt someone's feelings, not because we did something wrong.
Right. And before we can be right with God, I'm remembering a particular verse that Jesus gave in his Sermon on the Mount, there in Matthew chapter 5. He says, when you come to worship me at the altar, you bring your gift, and there you remember someone has something against you.
Yeah.
He says, leave that gift, then go make it right with that person, then come back and worship me.
Yeah.
Okay? So here we are, some 2,000 years later. We're going to worship on a Sunday morning with the church family. We have some responsibility to make sure our horizontal relationship is right before we can have that vertical relationship with God.
For sure.
And I don't know if we ever really consider that through the week as we go. Now it's Wednesday, okay? Yeah. Sunday's going to be coming up soon.
Yeah.
And I hope that whoever's watching or listening to this can evaluate to ensure that they're right with their fellow brother so that God will receive their worship on Sunday.
Yeah, for sure. You have to go into worship with the right mindset, and if there's one of those relationships that you're having trouble with a fellow church member, then you need to take the steps to make that right, especially if you're the one at fault.
Right.
And that's what we're looking at here.
Yeah. Because I think at times we bought into the devil's lie that we can be sideways with God's people and be upright with God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what Paul was trying to tell Onesimus. You can't be right with God, and if you're sideways with Philemon, you got to go back and correct it with Philemon.
Yeah. Eventually, you're going to have to face it. You can't just avoid those conversations forever. And it's better to get out there early before everything just continues to build and pile up and push deeper and deeper down. Because the further you push it, the more issues are going to arise because you're just stacking on a bigger pile.
Yeah, and I think the gospel shines the most when it comes to broken relationships.
Yeah,
because think about it. God has given us, what Paul's letter to the Corinthians, that we have the responsibility as ambassadors for reconciliation, bringing people to God and helping them to reconcile with God. So when we're sideways with one another, I can't help but think about the ingredients to, let's just look at it in regards to mayonnaise.
Yeah.
Okay? You have two ingredients that do not work well together in mayonnaise, which is oil and water.
Yeah.
But they do have one ingredient that can bring them together to work, and that's an egg. Okay? So in the world, we're made up of oil and water. Okay? But our emulsifier, as it's called, our egg that brings us that bonding agent, is going to be Jesus Christ.
Right.
So if we're truly following Jesus, then we're going to go through Jesus to make it right with a fellow believer.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts of the importance for this for your youth group going forward?
I think it's very important for these kids to learn how to navigate these problems now, and learn how to approach these conversations now. Because if you don't learn or practice or acknowledge these conversations now, then you're going to continue to have struggles with them for the rest of your lives. But the thing about like high school and middle school, it seems like all the problems are amplified to the highest extreme.
Yes.
As little as the issue may be, whether it's a just a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or something more serious as a close friend that you may have, or something little, like just a tiny argument that you have. Everything seems to be amplified to the highest extent at that age. Obviously hormones are changing, everything's changing, things are going 1,000 miles a minute in their heads. They don't know which way to go. And if we aren't leading by example in those conversations, if we aren't going and helping them through that conversation, then they're never going to learn. If we avoid it, and if we make rash decisions, then that's what our kids are going to do. And that's what we need to teach our kids is that those conversations are going to happen. And if we don't face them head on, and go to our brother and go to our sister and talk through these issues, then we're not going to have that healing and satisfaction, not only in our eyes, but in God's eyes as well.
Right. So that reminds me when you said that if we don't face those issues and confront them, reminded me of something my mom always taught me when I was that age of a teenager, broke up with a girlfriend, and we'd be at Walmart or somewhere, and I would avoid seeing this girl or talking to her. And my mom apparently took notice of that. And so she finally told me, she goes, Gene, if you constantly run away from your problem, it's just going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So she says, it's going to be better for you to go ahead and address it now and get beyond it, so that way it doesn't get worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could look at an unreconciled relationship like a sore on your hand that's not treated properly.
Yeah.
It can eventually get festered, infected, and it just becomes worse.
Yeah.
Until it's almost too late at times.
We have to treat our relationship wounds.
Yes. I'm not telling you it's easy, viewers and listeners, that reconciliation, but I'm telling you it's important enough that it has to happen, that Jesus Christ expects us. Because remember, he told the disciples there on his last night on earth, how you love one another, that's how people will know you're my disciples.
Yeah.
And so love is about the person in the relationship, not about how I feel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts on reconciliation from the perspective of Onesimus, who did the hurting?
Yeah. If you love someone and you hurt someone, go fix it with that someone. And that's what we need to learn today.
Yeah.
And if you want that relationship with God, and if you want to come in with the right headspace and worship, don't avoid it, because on Judgment Day, think of it like this: we're going to be talking about these things in our relationships and our sins that we've committed. Go face those things and reconcile with our brothers and sisters and reconcile with God.
Okay, very good. So next week we want to take a look at this letter once again, but we want to take it from Philemon's viewpoint. He's the one who was wounded. And I know that's going to be hard, because there's been people in our lives that have wounded us.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes we wish that bricks would fall on them or something, but that's not what God wants. And so we'll talk about that next week. So viewers and listeners, thank you for joining with us here on What About Jesus? I'm Gene.
I'm Grady.
Have a great day.